people going along their business, taxi drivers, construction workers, who don't get all the benefits of the growth. So that's my story. I'm sticking with it. I'm hoping, looking forward to pushback, because growth only comes when you're proven wrong. So looking forward to your feedback. Thank you. And now my colleague, Dr. Janai Smith, will talk about the data collection that the ministry has been involved in.
So as the minister has already outlined in her opening remarks, the Ministry of Home Affairs undertook a survey, a multi-part survey, trying to get a fundamental understanding of where we sit in terms of cost of living. I want to contextualize that survey for those of you who are data integrity experts. And so this was a participation voluntary study, and that means that only the people who wanted to do the survey did the survey. It means that the opinions reflected in the survey are of those who participated. So we can't extrapolate those to the population just yet, but this is an initial framework for us to begin a conversation about where we are going, the themes that were established in that conversation, and what that can lead us into in terms of future discussions. Is that clear for everyone? Yes? I'm a teacher by trade, so that's a thing for me, feedback. So are we clear together? Yes. All right. Just making sure that we're all on the same page. Collaboration is going to be important moving forward. So what was the purpose of the survey in terms of the overall intent? It was to assess the impact of the cost of living on Bermuda's residents and businesses. I'll give you some demographic breakdown in terms of the respondents to the survey, again, asking you to contextualize for yourself that this was voluntary. It is also meant to inform data-driven decision-making and guide the government into action. And what are we going to find? Well, 2,272 responses were from residents in Bermuda. That's fairly robust if you think about it being voluntary, and we didn't ask everyone to do it in order to keep their lights on. So that's important. 274 organizations representing business stakeholders were respondents. And the majority of the respondents in terms of business size were actually small businesses, which is very important to know. The sectors that we will cover in terms of themes that arose include the implications of imports, the implications on housing, food, and utilities. So those are the general themes. As you will see that the summit has been laid out based on those themes. They were not pulled out of a hat. They were generated from these data. So the purpose of this conversation, this early morning conversation, is to set the framework that data were used to begin this conversation. And we will continue. 3 key themes, let's say them together. Affordability, together. Affordability.
Affordability.
Pillars of financial strain on businesses and residents, and public perception. Now, these are, in my domain, we call variables, things that kind of shift the landscape. What is coloring this conversation? And these are the themes. Cost of living is often driven by a conversation about affordability. I can't afford X. My business can't afford to do X. It is also driven by what does this mean in terms of what I can do for myself? Because I cannot do X, I now also cannot do Y. Math teacher, happy days. So we've got all of these variables in play. And then on top of that, as if this wasn't enough, we have public perception. I feel like. A little less data, a lot more subjective, but still important, because perception is reality. And this is what we are trying to do. We are trying to inform perception and your lived experiences and marry that to data that actually helps us to understand how can we make decisions that target people's lived experiences without getting into anecdotes. Now, we can all talk about how much it costs to fill up our car, correct? But we want to generalize that. Is the cost of gas too much? That's a different question than, is it too much for me? So, we'll continue. Affordability stratified across 3 different outcomes: housing, groceries, healthcare. All of these things are essential. We have to live somewhere in sheltered housing. That's important. And we cannot take that for granted, that it must be affordable in the sense that everyone, as a basic human right, is entitled to shelter. We have to eat because we have not quite figured out how to live without food. When we talk about businesses, they often speak about the overhead. Predominantly, we shop here for our essentials, probably not the things that we buy on Amazon, but most of our essentials. And we also recognize that businesses have to make a profit in order to continue to exist. So they have overhead costs, and we have living costs, and everybody's costs are too high, and now we're all complaining and throwing stones at everybody's window, because it's actually your fault that my cost of living is high, and it's my fault because I don't make enough money, and it's the government's fault because they're not putting enough policies in place. And this is the purpose of this summit, to deconstruct that conversation and produce solutions together, collaboratively, using data as a framework and using our lived experiences as an opportunity to color the experience in the conversation. Food is expensive. Now, I went to the grocery store, anecdote, and I had to make a decision between fruit and candy. Even with sugar tax, the candy is cheaper. Right? So when I'm raising my godchildren and my nieces and nephews in terms of what decisions are you going to make around food and healthy choices, because understand these pillars work together. You can't have good health care, you can't have good health and wellness if you have poor food choices. If you cannot afford good food, then you, come on, this is good math. You end up with poor health. And so these are the targeted approaches that we are going to have to address in order to get at real solutions. The unfortunate part about a conversation like this is that it has some base assumptions that we need to dismiss early. That any one entity has the solution, that the solution will be fast, and that the solution will be acceptable for everyone. None of these things are true. I want that to be abundantly clear as a data scientist and an employee of our dear country. None of these things are true. The best that we can do is bring all of our tools and resources into the room, which is what we are doing today. Oh, that's not good. And then extend the conversation about what we can do collaboratively to forge a solution that works for everyone. Housing for residents. In the 2016 census, the majority of respondents were house owners by a small margin. But over 40%, almost 48% of respondents were rental persons. So now if we are a country where a significant portion of the persons, now help me, economists, this is good math, are renting, and we have a rental shortage, come on, everybody draw the line together. What are we going to experience? Higher prices. This is a supply and demand conversation. You all need it, and we only have a few, so I'm going to charge a premium because I got to make sure that I can make a good decision, an informed decision about who gets access. And so this is an important conversation to extend. We remember the key pillars from the beginning, correct? Affordability. Anyone remember the second one? Work together. Perception, that was third, but we'll go with that for second. Perception, and then financial strain on businesses and residents. So everybody's feeling it. And if that could be a great takeaway from the data, is that this is not an experience of one entity. Not just you as an individual, not just you as a business owner, not just us as the government, not just us as any one group. But everyone is experiencing this pain, these strains, in some way. I'm gonna run through this slide because the countdown turned orange, which is alarming. That means we are running out of minutes. And so housing, the reports say that rent is excessively high. We explained why just now in terms of supply and demand. We experience unexplained rent hikes, supply and demand. Repair issues with the landlord. Now, some of these are perception. Some of these are anecdotal, but they are also important, and they will not be undermined and devalued in the conversation because they also give us context to why people are experiencing strain. This is what strain looks like to the resident. Now, as a landlord, you may be like, well, you don't keep up your end of the bargain. But this conversation of he said, she said, and us versus them, invigorate the conversation with, this is what I can give you. This is how I can meet you halfway. I cannot give you free food, but I can make sure that food that is good for you is affordable. Affordable is a subjective word. It is a question for the much more nuanced people in the room. And then we get to utilities. Got to keep the lights on. We can't do anything. I think there are people that are watching us all over the world, maybe. And we need electricity. And so this gets into a very delicate conversation, which professionals later this evening will get to. It's not my domain, not even going to act like it is. There's the slide. This is what people were saying in terms of the strain of financial hardship related to utilities. But at the end of the day, people are experiencing hardships both as residents and as businesses, and it is our determination that only collaboratively can we come to a solution that can work for the majority of people, keeping in mind that it is no one entity's responsibility to achieve that one solution. Do you want to speak to that?
Do I have to? Businesses. I mean, a business person is a favorite target of the cost of living until I suppose you have to do it yourself, until you have to get into the grocery business and deliver products to shelves at an affordable price, or if you're the utility, making sure that the lights never go off. Those kinds of constraints make doing business in Bermuda particularly tenuous. Makes it a heck of a lot more expensive than it would be in other jurisdictions. But it comes down to sort of supply and demand. Our economy has been growing by leaps and bounds, but on the supply kinds of discussions that we need to have. How exactly are we going to transition to renewables? How are we going to expand the supply of land so that Tom Watson and the like can grow more crops? And I like to say that, you know, if you say you love this country, well, you can't love this country if you're not willing to sacrifice. And I think Janai has made it quite clear that we can't possibly make everybody happy. Each of us is going to have to sacrifice something, and in so doing, sort of show our love for our country. Janai?
The public perception piece in terms of the government framing, as the government hosted this survey, this gave respondents a very unique opportunity to speak back to the government in a way that we don't generally see. And that is, are we doing a good job? And you can all answer this for yourself, or you can read the slide. The public sentiment is, you need to do more. And everyone is now operating on a do more with less budget. Individuals and residents are in a do more with less budget. Businesses are in a do more with less budget. Government is in a do more with less budget. This is a zero-sum game. At the end of the day, this only works if everyone understands their value, what they can offer, and what they must sacrifice. In this conversation, you are sacrificing your time and maybe your coffee break or something to the like, to come and enter a conversation with a group of like-minded people who want to advance a very important issue for the country. We can get this right. I want to be very abundantly clear about saying that and being on record as someone who believes in the capacity of Bermudians to solve problems in Bermuda. I do think that we have sufficient expertise across all sectors and interests. I also do think that there is the will of the people to drive this conversation. The accountability of us to each other is what is often missing. If you do not tell me that I am doing a good job or I am doing a poor job, I cannot adapt in order to meet your needs. As a government, the minister has set out a platform, a very high-arcing platform, to go after something that touches every single resident of the country of Bermuda. The cost of living has no favorites. It impacts all of us. Maybe not equally, but it does impact all of us. And in that regard, all of us are responsible to engage in a formal way, leveraging our skills and our talents to advance the conversation, both based in data and our lived experiences. And only then do we arrive at a sustainable and a viable solution that feels comfortable because it is crafted and orchestrated by us. And this is where we're headed, the implications of this policy and summit discussion.
Thank you, Mr. Simmons and Dr. Smith, for their thorough analysis of the survey data compiled by the Ministry of Home Affairs and for unpacking it for us to set the stage for the upcoming panel discussions. I know that each of us will remember those three key themes: affordability, pillars of financial strain on businesses and residents, and public perception. We will now dive into some of the structural and operational realities that impact supply chain costs and discuss opportunities to enhance affordability and resilience. And so I would like to introduce our first panel for the day, Rethinking Imports in Bermuda, Driving Down Costs and Building Resilience, moderated by Jessica Mello from the Blue Economy Consultant at Blue Bridges. And joining this panel, we have Bryson Hakeman, Chief Executive Officer of Mailboxes, Cheryl Hayward-Chu, Chief Executive Officer of the Meyer Group of Companies, Carl Vincent Jr., the co-founder of Pronto Limited, Mr. Lawrence Scott, Chief Executive Officer of Scott's Craft Bermuda, and Mr. John White, Chairman of the Bermuda Container Line.
Great, thank you. So thank you first to the Minister for inviting us to speak today. I think I speak on behalf of the whole panel when I say it's an honor to speak on such an important topic for all of us today. In this panel discussion, our goal is to look under the hood of our import system and ask, where are the real cost drivers? What risks do our supply chains face? What's within Bermuda's control? And where can real change happen? And I think we'll talk a lot about food today because for most of us, it's something we experience in our everyday lives, so it's something we really understand. But imports also impact the cost of every industry in Bermuda because in housing, construction companies need to import construction materials and equipment, and the hospital needs to import all sorts of stuff. Belco needs to import fuel, and even your barber has to import supplies. So even the cost of a haircut is impacted by our import system. So I want to first talk about the key drivers of import costs in Bermuda, and then we're going to go on to maybe some areas for solutions. Carl, I want to go to you first. You're the co-founder of Pronto and City Market, and you're a retailer. And And the part of the supply chain that most of us understand, and maybe I'm speaking for myself, is when I go grocery shopping. And if I went into your shop, into City Market, and wanted to buy, say, a watermelon, because it's summer now, I see that watermelon on the shelf, and that's the thing I understand when it comes to the supply chain, but honestly, I have no idea how that watermelon got there, that you need to go through as a retailer to get them onto your shelf.
Perfect. I'll start by saying I'm very excited and happy to be a part of this panel and the conversation generally. There's a ton of very talented people on our panel and on all panels, and I admire everybody who's willing to take a part in fixing this or adding to what will be a solution. There's people in the crowd that I've looked up to, people in the crowd that I've learned from. Yeah, happy to be here. So that watermelon, well, what we represent as a shop is the last part of the storytelling process, and maybe the only part of the story that gets told. It's often a short conversation, but it really is a long story. And I think we'll all piece that together up here. But that watermelon, let's say, came from California, where a lot of them do come from, was loaded onto a truck by laborers. It was shipped across the country. It ended up on the East Coast. It went through a bunch of paperwork. It was in a refrigerated container. It was put on a ship, ended up at one of our distributors, which we maybe would have purchased it from or pre-purchased it from. So it required maybe ordering it 2 weeks in advance, whether it was a bin or whether it was a single watermelon. And that culmination of all that transportation, any storms that were on the way, any situations, and the price is the culmination of all of that. We can certainly do a better job of explaining where our produce comes from. It comes from all around the globe, whether we see, oh, it comes from New Jersey or it comes from Florida. But the truth is that the bell peppers came from Canada and they transited through America, or the strawberries came from California with the watermelons. And so it is a very long journey and a very long story. And oftentimes, I think if we paid attention to the stickers a bit more, we could see exactly how far the stuff's come from. Because that watermelon maybe retails for anywhere between $12 and $24, but it's been touched by at least 24 people to get here.
That's great. Thank you so much for that context.
Sure.
John White, I want to move to you next. You're a senator and also now the chairman of Bermuda Container Line. And I want to ask you, what is it about being a remote, tiny island in the Atlantic that makes our supply chains and our import system so unique? And how does that impact the cost of our imports that we see landing in Bermuda?
Thanks, Jesse. So good morning, everybody. I'll try to describe a little bit about how we move Carl's watermelon from New Jersey to Bermuda. So just to give a bit of background as to how the business works in Bermuda. So essentially 90% of all imports to this island arrive here on one of the 3 container ships. So 2 of the container ships are weekly services from the Northeast, from the New Jersey, New York area. The other container ship comes in from Florida bi-weekly. So the reason that 90%, such a high percentage, comes by way of the 3 container ships is because of the affordability of it. While there are some products that by necessity, like say fresh flowers or maybe high-end fresh fish, are flown in, the reality is that virtually everything that we live on and consume in Bermuda comes in by way of ship, whether it's medicine, medical supplies, appliances, construction products, everything that we need in Bermuda to survive on comes in by way of these 3 ships. You know, before I became chairman 14 years ago, I didn't understand how critical the ships were, but anybody who was here around 9/11, when we didn't have a ship service for a week, and we saw the bare shelves, can understand how critical the service is. So, what are the cost drivers now of the shipping industry? One is economies of scale. So Bermuda doesn't have economies of scale, whether it's the importers importing watermelons or the shipping lines themselves. So our ship, the Oleander, the largest of the 3 ships that services Bermuda, weekly from New Jersey, we have unionized labor both here in Bermuda and in New Jersey. It's public knowledge that last October, the Longshoremen's Association that services all the East Coast of the US, they received a contract increase over a 5-year period of over 60%. So as a shipper, we have no control over what that cost is. So that's an excess of 12% per year that is now being forced upon the shipping line. So that's our biggest cost, and Bermuda has no control over that. So that's item number one. Two is, Bermuda doesn't export anything. We manufacture, we have no manufacturing per se. We grow what we can from our land, but we consume it here. So the containers that come from New Jersey or Florida to Bermuda come full, but when they return to the US, they're virtually empty. So just imagine what your air ticket would be if you flew from New York to Bermuda and your plane is pretty full, and the return journey, there was no passengers on board. So as a shipper, we still have to incur the costs of driving our ship back to New Jersey, but receiving virtually no revenue. So that in itself makes the service very expensive. Next item is just, Bermuda has fewer people now, and I know this is a sensitive issue, and Dr. Smith and Mr. Simmons spoke about, I'm not suggesting we should have 5,000 more people or not. I'm just saying that the best years for the importers in terms of affordability were, say, before the 2009 period, when Bermuda had far more residents, because more containers means being able to have the shipper allocate fewer costs per container. So fewer people consuming goods, fewer containers coming to Bermuda means more expensive costs per container. So that's just the reality of economics. Next item is just the newer cost that every business must accommodate to according to, say, cyber risk. Who 10 years ago had ever heard of cyber attacks, which we know in Bermuda has taken place successfully against the government? Perhaps less known is that they have been successful at smaller businesses in Bermuda. And so we, as a shipping line, need to expend a pretty unusual amount of money to ensure that the cyber risk is preventable so that we can continue to provide reliable service to Bermudans. And the last item I just want to reference is the geopolitical risk that every country has to be concerned with. And I guess just recently, the US administration's attempt to legislate fees for any Chinese-built ship that makes a call to a US port that would have resulted in $1.5 million for every port trip, that would have tripled the costs. Had that gone through, unfortunately Bermuda is now exempted from it, but had that gone through as drafted, what would now cost about $3,500 to $4,000 per container to come to Bermuda would have cost $10,000 to $12,000 per container to come to Bermuda. So, that fortunately Bermuda was able to avoid. What's the next one? I mean, the Strait of Hormuz with the current Israeli-Iran situation. I mean, these are just risks that Bermuda faces that will impact potentially the cost of shipping to Bermuda. So I guess that, Jesse, I just want to give you some background. And are there some solutions to reducing the cost? Certainly, when the recent crisis about the Chinese-built ships was discussed, our company talked to places in Canada. So for example, could we transport goods to and from Halifax, which would be a possibility in the future to prevent dependence on the US. Having said that, it comes down to where do our customers want to be. They've been sourcing products from the New York, New Jersey area for decades, and to overnight switch their source of products from that area to Canada would obviously be problematic. It's not impossible, but it would take a long period of time. So, you know, I guess the other thing, could there be 40-foot containers as opposed to 20s? That's an issue that Bermuda has been talking about for years now, and there's obviously pluses and minuses to it becomes more affordable, but kind of roads that are, you know, currently in not great shape now adapt to not just 20-footers, but 40-foot containers on our roads. And so, you know, there are some things that could be done, not overnight, to reduce the cost of shipping, but, you know, I just wanted to give you sort of an outline of what the drivers of the costs are for our shipping line and the two others that service Bermuda. So, you know, I just want to leave with, I know it's not inexpensive to ship, but it's a reliable service, twice weekly, once bi-weekly. You know, any island to the south of us, believe me, does not have this reliability or timeliness of servicing an island. So, Jesse, that's my update on
Thank
shipping.
you, John. That was really helpful and thorough. I want to move to Cheryl. Cheryl Haywood-Chu, you're the CEO of Meyer Group of Companies and also the chair of Polaris, which is the parent of Stevedoring Services. And Stevedoring is the service that runs the Hamilton docks, if I'm not wrong. I wanted to ask you, John has talked about some of the structural issues, but what changes have you seen over time, maybe in recent years or maybe over decades? And what factors are maybe more fluid that have helped drive the increase in the cost of imports in recent years? Yeah, that would be helpful. Thank you.
Well, someone did tease me that going behind John, he would hit on all the top points. And I see that it was fairly close. And I'm really excited to be here. I think we're related, and this is critical. Just speaking, you know, one of the things with the shipping lines is that, you know, why do you have 3 ships? You know, are there other ways to configure it? Are there other ways to be more efficient? But the U.S.-Chinese ship incident actually highlighted why it's important to have the 3 ships, to have the different ports that we come out of. Bermuda has very strong contingencies. We saw that in COVID. We saw it in the 9/11 with the Chinese element. You know, it wasn't just that one ship would need to move or 2 ships would need to move to different ports. One of the lines, which I'm closer to, was not impacted the same way, but the question was how on earth would that one ship be able to carry that much goods to the island? So it's a bit more, everything touches everything else. I always think of it as a spider web. Speaking of through the decades, I mean, Mr. Simmons, you had the slide there, and that was pretty well right on par with what I was thinking of. If we use 2008 as the time when goods peaked to the island, and remember, all these things that make shipping more efficient are also all the things that drove cost, you know, our cost of living. So again, that interconnectedness is there. So you look at 2008 as a benchmark, America's Cup year, which we're like, yay, that was a really great year. That was really 16% down, and we're talking volumes of containers that came to the island. That was 16% down from 2008. Pre-COVID, which again, we were, woo, that was great. You know, 2019, we felt like we were moving in the right direction from an economy point of view and a business point of view. Again, the slides speak a little differently on how it was impacting the people, all the people of Bermuda. But that was actually, the volume was 17 to 19% down from 2008. And now we look at 2024 is the first full year, the only full year stats I have. We're 26% down in volumes from 2000. And also, it's not just population, it's construction. You know, we had, and what heated the economy up as well, but there was nice, big infrastructure projects. You know, you think the airport, that was big infrastructure projects. That drives the break bulk, which is everything that can't go into a container, and it drives, you know, you fit all it out. So that drives the volumes as well. So we don't have a lot of large construction projects. I remember my dad used to joke that the bird of Bermuda, national bird of Bermuda was the crane, because remember when all the cranes were up Yeah, not anymore. We do have a couple cranes, though. That's good to see. And then from driving costs as well, you know, the small ship market, small ships, we have miniature ships compared to the rest of the world. You know, our ships can carry 350 20-foot containers, and you think a norm now, I think I wrote it down somewhere, yeah. A norm now is between 4,000 and 8,000 containers. So, and that's a norm. That's not, you know, that's a norm like, you know, the Norwegian breakaway is a norm now, you know, that doesn't fit into Hamilton. So these ships can, I did ask one of our shipping agents, okay, so what would you think is a ship that could get to Murray's Anchorage? And he said, well, you know, 5 fathom hull, we can fit a 1,000 TEU ship. So we have 350, you know, just to get to 5 fathom hull, which is actually outside of Bermuda, it's not going inside, is 1,000. And the norm is between 4 and 8. So it really speaks to the scale that we have. So, but also with the 3 ships, again, that makes it perhaps more expensive in some ways, but we have backup, we have redundancy. So I don't know. But it's really, no matter what you look at, it will impact something else. So I love the fact that I came in thinking of population and volume, and then Craig's slide actually spoke to how that drove the cost of living on the island. So.
Thank you, Cheryl. I want to move on to where some improvements may be possible, and I'm watching the questions that you're all sending in. I can see them on the screen here. And one of the questions is saying, we're all being forced to be more efficient, and what can these companies do to enhance efficiency? So Bryson Hakeman, I wanted to go to you next. You are the CEO of Mailboxes Unlimited, which is a logistics company, essentially. Can you talk to us about some concrete changes that you and your business have been able to make, or that you think maybe are possible within import businesses in Bermuda, and things that might help contain the increase in costs of imports and also improve our resilience of our supply chains?
Yep. Yeah, thank you. Good morning. So the way we see it at Mailboxes, there's 3 opportunities really. So the first one being exports. So I'll double down on John here. The second one being the middle mile as we see it. So I'll double down on Carl here. And the third one being technology. And so if I can delve into those a little bit deeper, to John's point, we don't manufacture anything here in Bermuda. And so when you look at the balance of trade and what's coming into Bermuda versus what's going out, it's actually quite a staggering statistic that on average, we import 15 pounds for every 1 pound of export. That's a big number, right? And so when you look at the aircraft, it's specific to aviation, but when you look at the aircraft, as John alluded to earlier, is you have to fly the plane down and you have to fly the plane back. And so we are paying that round trip cost on the way inbound. And so that is a big challenge. I know the next panel is going to talk about groceries and food prices and cultivating food here locally. But you know, if you look at how do we fill the plane on the way back out, you know, if we can find a niche market on the East Coast for a Bermuda onion, I have to tell you, I'm not a fan of onions, but I do love a Bermuda onion, right? And so whether that's an opportunity to find a niche market with a premium price, you know, and we start exporting onions, we've got ginger beer here, Barrett's Ginger Beer. There's coffee roasters on island who have international demand. So there are things that we can export. We have to find those markets and start to fill that plane up on the way back out. And by doing that, that will start to lower our import costs on the aircraft, okay? So that's one. The second part, if we talk about the middle mile, and it's been a very fruity discussion, so I brought a banana, and we'll talk about bananas here as an example, okay? If you think back to Dr. Smith and Mr. Simmons' presentation, supplier cost was somewhere about that much of the banana. It's quite large, right? And so I'll raise the question to the panelists and the viewers that if we were to source our bananas, our watermelons, our other fruits from areas like Costa Rica, for example, and we flew those directly into Bermuda so they didn't have 24 people touching it along the way. So if we increase transportation costs 50-ish cents per pound, do we save more than 50 cents by going directly to the source? Do we save more than 50 cents by eliminating the loss in the grocery stores? Do we save 50 cents by touching different ports, avoiding tariffs in the US? All of those sorts of things, okay? And so that's what we look at as the middle mile. And so that's a solution which can be implemented very quickly, right? The math and the numbers and the relationships already exist. And so that's an example of something we can do today from a logistics perspective. Now, I say that cheek and tongue because it's much more difficult to do that, talking about relationships with the vendors and do we know the manufacturers or the growers in Costa Rica, for example. All those things take time, right? And so that's just another way to look at it and another idea to put up on the drawing board. And the third one, more into a microeconomic analysis, is what can companies do locally? And so I really want to put a big emphasis on technology and what we focused on at Mailboxes. And so we started our digitalization journey back in 2019. And so what that has allowed us to do is, as our input costs go up, aviation costs, healthcare, energy, wages, as all those input costs go up, our investment in digitalization has allowed us to relatively maintain our costs. And so if you look at what Mailboxes has done over the last 3 years, we've not had a price increase since 2022, okay? And that is solely driven off of our investment in digitalization. And so, we often hear, customs is delaying our stuff, or we're losing stuff in transit because of customs, and there's waste and those sorts of things. And I'm not saying it's not real. I'm saying it's something that WIMS was telling us and what the regulatory bodies wanted. By actioning all that stuff, we have a system that helps speed that process up and eliminate some of that waste. So for all the stakeholders out there who are listening and saying, how can we at least have cost avoidance? How do we not increase one for one? How do we hold those cost passing exercises backwards? I speak as a voice of encouragement to really look closely at how do you digitalize your business? Because yes, we've not had a cost increase in 3 years. This year we're looking at how can we reduce costs? And so for us, it's very, very impactful. And I really can't underline that enough, that if you really look internally to see how can you digitalize your own business, it may prevent you from adding costs, but it may also give you an avenue to reducing costs. And that's exciting for this forum. So hopefully that gives you some of it. There's some good questions on here I'm sure we'll get to.
There's some great questions on the screen. Thank you, Bryson.
Yep.
Lauren Scott, I want to move to you next. You're the current chairman of the Bermuda Airport Authority, and also, I think, an aviator, a pilot, and an entrepreneur yourself.
Yes.
Thank you for being here. I wanted to talk to you about some ways we might think differently. You're an entrepreneur and an innovator yourself. How can we think differently about how we import things to Bermuda? How might we think about diversifying our supply chains and the source markets we go to, and just maybe think outside of the box? As someone with that innovative mindset, what are your views? And I notice there's some questions in the same vein on the screen. So,
all right.
Yeah.
So I'm excited to be here as well. And I grew up with the notion, don't put all your eggs in one basket. And so we have a generational relationship with the United States, UK, and Canada, but we haven't diversified and seriously looked at the Latin America and Caribbean market. Just to put things in perspective, the LAC exports $300 billion a year to the United States, Canada, and the UK. If you narrow that down, 10%, $30 billion comes from the CARICOM nations and the Dominican Republic. We could then, and these exports are oil, natural gas, manufactured goods, medical utensils, and perishables, fruits and vegetables, and agriculture. If we were to start building those relationships, working with those partnerships, our purchasing power is stronger in and throughout the Caribbean. The cost of labor is less. And so what we could do is start looking there, meaning, let's say, use the Dominican Republic as an example. They have the PepsiCo with Frito-Lay, have agriculture and farms down there. We could then enter into almost an outsource or outgrowers program, meaning the government here says, hey, could you reserve X number of acres of land for us to cultivate as we deem necessary. Government then partners with the local farmers and says, hey, farmers, you manage that operation down in the Caribbean. You know what we need. You know what Bermudians, the crops, the seasons, and all of that. You do that. And then what we do is we enter in this relay team here. Our aircraft, which are our assets that are in the region, can test the market, putting a couple thousand pounds on our aircraft here. As that starts to become more and more stable, we upgrade to Bryson. And then after Bryson taps out, we then come over to the heavy hitters on my left and my right, and they come in and they start bringing in all of the real bulk. And not saying to abandon the current connections that we have in partnerships, but just to diversify. And I believe that what that does, because they are manufacturing nations, the economies of scale, which was spoken about earlier, could then be sort of used in our advantage, because the manufacturers in the Caribbean are used to small nations. They have the St. Barts, they have the Cayman Islands, they have the other smaller jurisdictions. And so we can then, instead of going through wholesalers, go direct to the manufacturer and say, hey, that flavor of Pringles that we don't normally get because we don't have it in bulk, we can get them to manufacture it for our taste, for our size, and for our community.
Great, thank you, Lawrence. I want to give the panelists a chance to answer some of the questions coming in from the audience, and also to respond to some of the things you may have heard from each other. So, Carl, I wanted to start with you. There's a question for you specifically. It says, you mentioned purchasing 2 weeks in advance. How does the local embargo impact your shipments?
Okay. Local embargo is in two, I guess, facets here. It's to be celebrated because it means that we're growing something. It means that we have product to sell and that our land is doing its job. It can pose challenges when, so how it works, and correct me if I'm wrong, I know the Farmers Association is here. A farmer can foresee what will be pulled up in 2 weeks' time. Mm-hmm. So they let the Department of Natural Resources know, and then they send out the embargo list, which goes to distributors and to grocery stores. From there, we then adjust our orders and buy what we need to buy locally and buy the rest from the importers and distributors. If there's a massive rain that was unexpected and the broccoli crop was lost or potatoes couldn't be harvested, well, the downside is that, well, I didn't import any broccoli. There was no broccoli picked, so guess what? No one gets any broccoli this week. So that sort of scenario does happen a couple of times a year, and it does make you think, hey, are all of our eggs in one basket for this opportunity? But you also understand, hey, we have an industry that we need to protect, and how can we work together to make sure that the consumer gets what they want, the nutrients that they need, et cetera, all the time. Hope that answers that question.
Thank you.
Yeah.
There's another interesting question from the crowd that's saying, are there any government regulation constraints that could be eased so that you can run your businesses more effectively? I wanted to pass that to the panel. Do any of you have a comment on regulation, and if any regulation could be lifted or eased, how that could potentially help contain the cost of imports?
Yeah, I could touch on it. I mean, I think that the private sector does what the private sector does. Mm-hmm. And so if you give the private sector a problem, it will go out and try to solve that problem. And I think if you look at, what relaxation of regulations or what flexibility would help the businesses run more, is I think there has to be flexibility within some of the government functions. And so let me give you a few examples. If you were to fly a plane in from Costa Rica, but it doesn't land until 8 or 9 o'clock at night, Customs needs to be able to be there and receive it. They do this today, by the way, right? Shout out to Bermuda Customs. They receive the BA flight. Mm-hmm. If you look at Marketplace is bringing in goods, grocery goods directly from the UK. It's coming in on the BA aircraft, and Customs is there to receive it. And so as the private sector scales the business and tries to increase these different lines and these different supply sources, there's a flexibility there. Specifically also involved in that would be DENR, right? Because to the point, I think there's a question on bananas on here. I don't want to get too stuck on bananas because there's a bunch of stuff that comes out of Costa Rica or these other islands, right? Melons, mangoes, all these things, right? That was just the prop that was available. And so DENR has to be available to receive those to make sure that they're comfortable with them as well to protect the island. So I think those are two examples from an air freight perspective where the flexibility in the government to say, okay, what does the private sector want to do? What solution are they offering and how does that help the public? And can we adjust and accommodate? So I think that's one example. I'm sure there's other examples that John or Cheryl can give around 40-foot containers and where does it make sense to source in a high capacity, right, and use a 40-foot container and maximize the density of it. I'm sure there's things TCD or the other departments could do.
Yeah, I mean, right now, you can get exceptions and you're allowed to have 40-foot containers come in for certain projects or certain events, but you know, the bigger question has been for years now, you know, can Bermuda roads accommodate 40-footers? Also the docks, can they accommodate 40-foot containers in the volume that we would expect? And I think the answer is probably no to that one. So I think it sounds good in theory, and I'm not suggesting that wouldn't bring down the cost of shipping. This has been discussed many times over the years, and I think the result has been, thus far anyways, that our roads that are not in great shape as it is with 20-footers could not accommodate 40-footers. So, you know, we'll see what happens.
I mean, the 40-footers, for a group of people on the island, that's been a really hot topic, probably completely, no one's aware of it. One thing with the dock is that the current configuration, it couldn't handle the volumes that we used to have at all. I mean, we've got a large X-ray machine in the middle, so that does restrict the volumes that come through. So when we look at how costs are, there are restraints that we have now that couldn't accommodate the volumes that we had before.
Thank you. We have just 5 minutes left. I think there are a couple of questions about diversifying the source market. So one question about Canada, one question about Latin America. Maybe, Lawrence, would you like to talk about diversifying? I know that you already spoke about that. Is it possible for us to consider Canada or Latin America as markets? You've already spoken about this, or maybe John would like to also step in.
Yeah, I believe that we've already looked at Canada. I think that we haven't explored the opportunities in the Caribbean region and Latin America, CARICOM nations. Once again, you're looking at $15 billion in exports solely from CARICOM alone. And that's inclusive of oil and natural gas, which can be refined in the Caribbean as well and then shipped up here on their way to other markets like Boston and the New England area. I believe that what we can do is when we diversify to CARICOM and we start looking with manufacturers and we start having land reserved down there, what we're doing is just extending the landmass per se that Bermuda doesn't have. And then if you look at just, and I would defer to John and Ms. Chu about the nautical distance, it's relatively close to that of the eastern seaboard. So I don't anticipate, but I defer the shipping costs. But when it comes to air freight would be look at it as a relay race with a start. We test the market, we see if it's viable. If it is viable for our aircraft, then we hand it over to Bryson. He brings in the bigger aircraft. If it's still viable, then we hand it over to John and Ms. Chu to then basically supply the island on a sustainable basis.
I'm going to ask Carl to follow up on that. Yeah.
Right. So I think as a grounding element, what is important to note is that what we import is a reflection of what people want. And while every option in every port is a great option, if the product that other countries or other ports are offering isn't wanted in large volumes by the population, well then the conversation, it kind of seems like it has to go customer distributor because there's a missing element of, hey, yeah, we like this as a country. We need to buy, I don't know, 10 containers worth of it to start, or a container worth of it to start. How do we bridge the gap of understanding, hey, I think Dominican mangoes or whatnot would be fantastic, but how do we first confirm that our customer would want them? Or
I think that in today's market, what we're talking about is affordability. If you bring in a product directly from the manufacturer, where we've shortened that middle mile to where
Just pick up on what Carl and Lawrence just said. So as a shipper, we could ship from Halifax, for example, or St. John, New Brunswick. The question is, do our customers want us to ship from there? So it doesn't make sense for us to say we're traveling from, then that would potentially lower the costs of shipping, but it's got to be driven by the consumer, the customer, for us to be able to accommodate
And when you
what
all
they
say
need.
the consumer, the customer, do you mean like me in the grocery store trying to buy a watermelon, or do you mean wholesalers or retailers? Who's the customer?
Well,
Who do you
it's
mean?
it's retailers and wholesalers. So now, coming from, say, Halifax, we wouldn't have weekly service then. So the downside is we've been fortunate in Bermuda to have weekly service for as long as I can remember. So one ship comes in on a Monday, one on a Thursday. Bermudans in the supermarkets love us because they have fresh produce throughout the entire 7 days. If now Bermuda says, okay, we want to have lower prices, but to come in from Halifax, for example, then we may not have the same timeliness of having the ships come in the way that we've been accustomed to them for decades now.
We have 20 seconds left according to the screen, so I'm going to close out by saying I think this was a really fabulous discussion. Thank you so much. And what I take away from the end of that discussion actually is that we as the consumers, the person in the grocery store, we do have some power in this, and we do have some say, and we can, as the end consumer.
Thank you again to the panel for that informative session and understanding digitalization and diversifying markets and making that a bit more clear for us as the ultimate consumer. As a reminder to the attendees and to the public, please make sure to use Slido to provide your questions during each of the panel discussions. Thank you for all of the questions that you've asked so far. Please continue to do so as we go throughout the next few panels. And also make sure to complete the sector surveys that will be accessed after the next few panels at lunchtime. And those will be located in the back of the room for the QR codes that I mentioned this morning. Moving on to our next panel, this one is a two-part panel discussion titled Food Security and Affordability from Farm to Fork. Part one of the discussion will begin with our local food suppliers. So please welcome to the stage our moderator, Ms. Liana Nanang Omodele, strategic advisor and entrepreneur at Unstoried Limited, and our guest panelists, Mr. Aaron Lissand Bloom, CEO of Bermuda General Agency and Pitco Limited, Mr. Zach Moniz, manager of the Lindos Group of Companies, Mr. Philip Barnett, president of the Island Restaurant Group Limited, and Mr. Spencer Butterfield, CEO of Butterfield and Vallis, and also Mr. Vernon Hassel, vice president of Purchasing and Procurement at the Marketplace Group.
For joining me, gentlemen. Can everyone hear me? Okay, yes. So before we even begin our first conversation, I actually want to bring up our first audience poll. So I think we're going to bring up on Slido an audience poll for you, and I would love for you to look at it and cast your votes accordingly, and we will get into the conversation, some of the results, and have the insights from these lovely men who are here joining me today. So we've just had a panel on some of the import conversation, and this involves some of the importing conversation as well, which was great. They really laid the groundwork for us to continue. So I'm going to actually ask a question of all the panelists, and I'll just start and go around. What are the key cost components contributing to the high retail price of food in Bermuda? Would you like to kick us off?
Sure. Thank you for having me here. Unfortunately, we're all kind of in the same boat here. We're all driven by the same costs, the same challenges. the same opportunities. But by and large, the factors that drive what we're bringing to the island are, or how we can bring them to the island in an affordable fashion, are going to be ocean freight, supply chain, the first cost of goods, and how we can have access to the most affordable option. And if it's not the most affordable, is it one that can bring the most value to our customers? Labor, warehousing, just carrying cost of the product. We're in a limited market over here with limited space and limited options. And so the access that we have to methods of bringing down cost and making more affordable, more efficient options and decisions is just limited in what we can do.
Thank you. I'm actually going to go over to Spencer Butterfield from Butterfield and Vallis. You know, we talked about in this, our prep, there's a lot of conversation around how much certain things cost, right? What's your overhead cost versus your landed cost? Can you talk a little bit about, from your perspective, Butterfield and Vallis' side, you know, how that cost comes across for you guys?
Absolutely. I don't want to ruin the, or give
no,
away the answer.
No, don't give
it's
that
difficult
part
for me
away.
To speak to numbers without giving away.
The third thing that we talked about.
Okay.
Yes.
I think I'm going to give away your answer here. Is that okay?
That's okay.
Okay, because I feel at a loss if I can't speak to it.
I think we've had enough answers now. I don't know.
Yeah, we've given you time to make guesses, and I love that 50% is the one that comes up. Roughly 55% of every dollar that we sell is the cost on the East Coast. So it's actually 75%. There's an additional 20% in getting it here. So by the time it lands in Bermuda, we're at about 75% of what we sell. So then we've got 25% to pay our labor is our next biggest cost, which is about 50%. The list goes on, but there's a very, very small amount left for us to manage all of those local costs. We employ local workforce. Is there an efficiency by offshoring some of our resources? And that's something we've chosen not to do because we employ Bermudians. At the end of the day, we're fighting to earn 1 to 3% net profit margin. So to answer that question, 75% landed costs in Bermuda, and then we deal with that 25% to try and end up with 1 to 3% net margin.
Yeah, so that's a significant amount before it's even hitting you, let alone before it's hitting Marketplace or Lindo's. So again, talking about what is controllable in Bermuda. So we're here at a cost of living summit. We're trying to find solutions, but fundamentally there's this base price of 75% that we can't really have any movement on. Is that correct?
No.
Zach?
So yes, the first cost is the price that we're paying to the supplier abroad or locally, or we'd be importing it. So then you've got the freight, then you have the tax, and then you have the markup. Mm-hmm. So if we're talking about solutions, my opinion would be that you would tackle the freight part of that. We have no leverage on the first cost. As John and those guys were saying in the previous panel, we're too small. We just do not have any leverage. We're price takers, we're not price makers. And if we're going to try to tackle it anywhere, it has to be on the freight side, or at least in my opinion, right? So there's 4 components that make up that retail price. You've got the first cost, you've got the freight, you've got the tax, then you have my markup. Mm-hmm. And as Spencer was saying, built into that markup are all of the indirect expenses that go toward running the business. Top one is labor, list of expenses that markup now has to cover. And like Spencer said, we're dealing in very small percentages in profit, right? And I think that is the challenge. So where are we going to attack as a solution?
Obviously duty costs and sort of duty relief, 5%, we're moving it to 0% on fresh produce. I want to also hear from Zach on this as well, but from your perspective, what kind of duty relief, how does that relay into retail prices?
So I think the bigger question is some of the regulations that are affecting the cost of goods. So for example, we know that Bermuda's economy is tied very closely to the US. And that in being tied to the US, since COVID, the US prices have gone up domestically 28%. So, as Zach mentioned, that we have to pay the first cost from our suppliers. We have no control over that. We do not have economies of scales in order to get US prices down from our suppliers. 75% of the goods that we purchase in Bermuda, we purchase from local wholesalers, from the Butterfield Vallis, BGA, Dunklers, Viking. Those are 4 main wholesalers that we purchase from. So when we look at the duty relief, and there was that 5% duty relief on 1 orange, that turns out to being a cost reduction of 3 cents. Prices in the US are going up 20%. So as the prices in the US are going up, the duty relief of 5% or 3 cents quickly eroded with shipping costs, trucking costs all going up. So we end up with there is a chain effect. And without collaboration between all parties, and in all parties we're talking about the shipping industry, government, retailers, wholesalers, it's going to be challenging to get prices down. We also have a lot of regulation that is in effect. For example, Mr. Scott, who was on the previous panel, talked about us getting produce from the Caribbean. Right now, the Bermuda regulation is that there is no produce imported from Florida or from the Caribbean. So to reserve land in the Caribbean countries to import produce when we are not allowed to. So there's regulations that need to be addressed, things that need to be explored. I would love to be able to have Haitian mangoes in Bermuda. That's my favorite mango. But based on the current regulation, they cannot be imported to Bermuda. All mangoes have to be heat treated, so it limits where you can purchase them from. And they have to stay in the box that says heat treated. If, on occasion, one of our merchandisers decides to change the display, we get a call. Bananas, I could go on and on bananas. But I'll give you one other example. So I brought a lemon with me today. So on this lemon, there's a sticker. That sticker is so the Department of Natural Resources can track this lemon to make sure it doesn't come from Florida, because we have an embargo on any items from Florida. So, as was mentioned, lemons, a lot of the produce has come from Florida, it's transported over. If we could get a regulation so that we don't have to have stickered fruit, and we can, this is called an extra fancy lemon, comes with a cost to get the sticker on it. If we could get these stickers removed and allowed to bring in unstickered citrus, this will cost between 15 and 20% less. And that will reduce the price from $1.09 to 89 cents overnight.
Thank you for sharing that, because I think what we're really focused on here at this Cost of Living Summit is solutions. Now, of course, I'm not an expert in environmental and natural resources. I am not the person to be able to say what's safe and what's not safe, but I think fundamentally what you're saying is there needs to be an assessment on whether the risk and reward, whether protecting our natural environment, are we going too far or are we going just far enough? And perhaps that's something that then the government can look at in terms of very specifically having a direct result to lowering food costs, because we do need to protect our natural environment. But I know that in our prep call, Spencer, you talked about like the burden as well on inspection and your truckers and all of the rest. Can you talk a little bit more, just a little bit about
Sure, that was specific to bananas, and the topic has come up. Everyone eats bananas, and you'll recognize the quality of banana isn't what it once was. We were in the banana business, large volume, and each box, each case was mandatory to be inspected, taken to the botanical gardens, so unloaded from a container, put on a truck, multiple staff to go and unload that, to have it inspected and support the inspection process, and then load it back on the truck before we're able to take it to customers. it was onerous on our team. The cost was too high. We weren't comfortable selling them, and we got out of the business.
Right.
So, as you say, there is responsibility and policy needs to be in place. But is it, in my opinion, that one is a little heavy-handed, and as a result, the bananas in Bermuda are the quality that they are.
Thank you. Speaking still about these overall costs, what role does purchasing power, I'm going to ask you, Aaron, about what does this play in shaping the food costs in Bermuda?
It's huge. As Mr. Hassel pointed out earlier, we just don't have the demand which allows us to work our way into more affordable purchasing brackets. We just don't have it. Part of that is probably our own fault. We are so close to the United States that come long weekend, we take a flight out to New York, and the first thing we do is we head to Target and Walmart, and we do our shopping, right? And we see all these brands on the shelves, and when we come back, we expect to see the same brands. And what happens then is that, I think it was Carl that said it earlier, we are driven by the demand of our customers. So if you want to have 4 different types of mayonnaise on the shelf, we'll bring you 4 different types of mayonnaise. But the demand for mayonnaise is finite. It is 100 boxes spread out over for 4. If we can change the way that we are purchasing, the way that we at home manage our demand and manage our expectations for products, we could then maybe move into different categories, different brands, white label, private label products, which are sometimes manufactured by the same large manufacturers that we already purchase from, but that don't have the marketing associated to it, to move into that bracket pricing, which is more affordable. But we have to manage our expectations then. Is Hellman's the best mayonnaise? I think it is. I think a lot of us do, but again, that's that stickiness of that brand loyalty. Mm-hmm. Can we go to a white label product, a private label product, which is 90% as good and meets my needs, but it's 30% cheaper? Is that good enough? Well, for some of us, it will be. And we'll make that conscious decision to move to that different product. But for a lot of us, that's what my mom gave me. It's the best in the world. I'm never going to change. So one of the things that we found, just to round it out, is that when we're looking at alternatives to items currently in the market, we found that the public's willingness to convert to a new brand only started to become visible and apparent when we're about 30% cheaper than current established big brand names. So 30% cheaper, we start to see a movement of demand. Unfortunately, we are creatures of habit. So we'll see this demand spike in product, we'll get all excited, we'll bring all this product in, and then we go into our bad habits, we go back to our established brands, and you know what? The price is the price, and I'm gonna pay it because it's just an assumed cost of my living.
So then that goes, I want to talk to Zach about that actually, because in COVID, obviously we were quite limited with our choices. So can you speak a little bit about brand preferences?
Yeah, sure. A lot of the brand names were not available in COVID. So we had to go out and find alternative brands. And a lot of them were the generic style of brands. So we did fill the shelf with those brands. But as soon as the brand names came back, even though they were more expensive, if the consumer's not buying them, it's very difficult to keep it on the shelf. We don't want to bring product in to throw it out. So that is one of the challenges, even with, it's the consumers who are deciding what we put on the shelf and what they are willing to buy. So if you want to buy a generic brand, you tell me, we get it in, continue to buy it. It'll continue to show up on the shelf. And I think that's one of the challenges is people in Bermuda are very brand conscious. So, and that is, that's a strategy on the part of, a store and their, whatever, Vernon might do something different than we do, but we target the brands specifically because we know that that's what Bermudians want, right? So, and we know from when we do offer those other brands, it's very difficult because we end up, it's formula driven, right? So the landed cost is what is going to determine what that price is, in addition to my markup. So each department has a specific markup based on the expenses that that department incurs. So if it's a grocery item, it's less markup than if it's a chill item. If it's a butcher item, there's more labor, there's chill, there's, you got to keep the stuff cold, all of that. All of that's built into the markup for the meat department, and so forth for the produce department. So when I get an item, this is the landed cost, it gets insert into the database, and the software works out the landed cost, or works out the retail price based on the parameters that we have set for that group of items. So it's the entire department. Grocery, produce is one markup, and the meat department is another markup. It's all set up, and that's not swinging, that's not changing. It's staying there no matter what happens to that landed cost. So it really is the landed cost that determines what the price is going to be in the end.
Thank you. I'm just going to go to Spencer quickly. I know you had
I had a quick one circling back to what we have on the island. When we have, when our suppliers come and visit us, and they generally manage the Caribbean region, they're astonished at the amount of variety that we have on the shelves in Bermuda. I think Craig said it much earlier, the history of where we got to. Offerings of food 30, 40 years ago were not nearly what they were today, but the business executive demanded that the food quality was enhanced. We did that. And so the standard of living that is offered, I'm not saying it's available to everyone.
Group, quickly.
Yeah, no, it's really interesting because I hear a lot about brands and the importance of brands on the shelf, but the reality is when you go to a restaurant and the food comes out, nobody cares whether it's Hellman's or whether it's Best of Bermuda, as long as it tastes fantastic and it's really good quality. So we have an opportunity in restaurants to buy white label products, to buy non-label products, and the suppliers are gonna hate me saying this, but I don't wanna say beef is beef is beef, but a certain grade of beef is the same, similar, across different purchasers. So guess what we in the restaurant industry do? We go with the most aggressive pricing, and we go with there's service and supply, and there's other reasons in order to keep our prices down, because we know that competitively, we are actually up against the grocery stores. The next choice after, and not only are we competing against each other, because the stickiness of our clientele is pretty tenuous. If someone wants to have a meal, they can go to one of the 79, sit-down restaurants in Bermuda. Whereas, if you're really going to go to Marketplace or Lindo's or maybe Arnold's if you're shopping, we have to be so much more competitive, which is why in our industry, I call it the industry of thirds. A third goes to the cost of your goods sold, a third goes to your cost of labor, and then a third goes to your overhead costs, which include rents and Belco and everything else. And when I keep on explaining to people, I would love because everybody looks at us as you're the problem. Restaurants are the problem, why everybody in Bermuda is underpaid, and why we have this struggling level of our socioeconomic society. And I would love to pay all of our staff, but none of you want to pay $50 for a hamburger. So until you're willing to pay $50 for a hamburger, we have to continue charging $25 for a hamburger to be competitive to all the other restaurants that are out there, which means that we can only pay a third of that to our staff. So it's all market driven. And I wish we had more control over it, and all we can do is make the process and the operation as efficient and as excellent as possible to drive more business in through our doors as compared to our competitors' doors.
I do want to keep going, but I also do want to give the audience some chances with their questions. So we can come back, keep your thought. There's a couple questions here that are quite similar. Price of new generic items come in low, yet they increase and are the same as name brands. Why is that? And then there was another question similarly about generic versus brand preferences. How do you actually determine the brand preference of consumers in Bermuda? Are there surveys of the customers? Would you like to take this?
So we are able to determine what our customer preference is by running sales movement reports. That will basically tell us, is there preference for Hellman's mayonnaise over our Bowl and Basket brand, over Bermuda's Best, over Kraft? And unfortunately, without a doubt, the more expensive Hellman's mayonnaise wins every year over the last 20 years I've been at Marketplace. To try and change their preference is challenging. We know that Hellmann's mayonnaise right now in our shops are $9.99. Berlin basket, $7.99. You would think that individuals would say that, cost of living, pricing. Let's look at some of the differentiated products that Marketplace offers to give individuals choices at lower cost. Quality similar or the same, because we also know that Berlin basket, they don't manufacture anything. As was mentioned, private labeled items are sometimes made in the same manufacturing location as name brand items. But name brand items, they have the advertising force behind them to push their items and on social media, television, markets, which is why they will now cost more. We also offer lower priced items in our dollar stores, bulk buy items in our price right stores to give customers choice. The main thing is to give customers choice at various price points so that they can experience the savings. And as Zach mentioned earlier, oftentimes they don't pick up their choice. They go for the higher priced items. And just to go to the restaurant group, it was mentioned that they're in a highly competitive market. The grocery stores are as well. Zach's looking at my prices, I'm looking at his. I'm looking at the price of the gas stations because they also sell groceries. I'm looking at the prices in pharmacies because now they sell groceries. Even hardware stores now sell groceries. So our competitive landscape, there's 70 different formats that sell groceries. And we're constantly looking at them time and time again, and we don't want to be beat. So we're constantly looking at how do we do promotions? How do we get prices down? How do we offer items that have lower cost for our customers so that they have a choice? How do we get some of the regulations to come down so we can reduce retails because costs have come down, so we can buy from different jurisdictions? Gas stations can sell groceries, but we can't sell gas. We can't sell over-the-counter medicine, even though pharmacies can sell groceries. The landscape is fierce.
So that just quickly, I think one of you could probably answer this because there's a couple questions about that. So talking about alternative markets. One is, why do we have an embargo on produce from Florida? And can we get an answer on why Bermuda is not allowed to purchase from the Caribbean?
Yeah, there's certain types of pests that we don't want in Bermuda for sure. So, I mean, the department does have regulations that exist for our benefit, that's for sure. So there's fruit fly and all kinds of different things. So there are, certain things that could be relaxed, like certain citrus out of Florida. Oranges is not one of them, but lemons and limes, hardly anything comes out of Florida anymore, so you could drop that requirement to have it stickered. But it is important that you can't just open the gates.
Right.
So, yeah.
Okay, thank you. So I actually had another poll question, although you've kind of stolen my thunder a little bit with it, but we'll take it up. It's about, for the audience poll that's going to come up, is about how much you think the reduction on produce to 0%, whether it would have a meaningful impact on grocery prices. And as that comes up, we'll continue our conversation. We've talked about some operational and regulatory barriers, things like refrigeration costs. I can't remember which one of you talked about it, but like the cost of refrigeration, the cost of electricity. We all know the cost of electricity in Bermuda is very, very, very high. So who would like to take that?
I'd love to take that one.
There you go, take it, refrigeration.
I'd love to take that one. So the cost of refrigeration costs. So in order to get a refrigerated case in Bermuda landed, costs us about $40,000 per case. Marketplace, we have about 400 of these refrigerated cases around our stores, either in back room or display cases. So that's a $17 million investment. If that was to go down, we're basically up the creek. That cost us $1 million per year to maintain. That's just to maintain our current refrigeration. We have put a lot of investment into LED lights, upgraded refrigeration to make it run more efficiently. 5 years ago, we have reduced our consumption of electricity from 5 years ago. But yet our Belco bill keeps rising. Last year alone, our Belco bill was $4 million, right off the bat. Our customs bill was $6.3 million. Our bill for importing containers ranges between $8 million to $10 million annually. That's whether the containers full or empty. So, there's a lot of expense there.
And I want to just point out, what Vernon's talking about, that does not impact the price.
No, not at all.
That's not affecting the retail price at all. That's
cost of
built
doing
into the
business.
markup. And we do well when we try to control those expenses that are inside that markup. So we get surprises all the time, like Vernon's, you need a generator in case the electricity goes out so that you don't lose all of the product that's in those cases. And if that, a generator is anywhere from $500,000 to $1 million, right? And if that breaks on you, then you've got to replace it. That's a $750,000 expense all of a sudden that it directly impacts our bottom line. It doesn't impact any of the prices on the shelf. So I think it's important to note that all of these expenses that we're talking about now are in that markup and have no effect on the retail other than the fact that they're built into the markup. And any fluctuation in that, we eat.
Yep.
So it's...
Including labor, Marketplace pays $25 per hour, starting for putting on a name badge. One of the highest paid retailers on the island. And we'll continue to be, and we're proud of that fact. That's a cost of doing business.
Yes, please.
It's a great point, but we're also missing the fact that it's also compounded. So when you are bringing in your containers direct, you have that issue of refrigeration and the cost of running and customs bill and all that kind of stuff. Part of our business, Spencer and myself, is that of wholesale distribution to the likes of yourself, the retailers, and then Phil on the food service side. We are also beholden to those costs. So our markup will, by necessity, also reflect the reinvestment that we have in our facilities. It's building the new boxes. It's buying a new freezer truck, which can be $100,000 right off the bat. And every 10 years you need a new one because you got salt water and you got everything else in the air. It's about building solar panels up on your roof to try and offset that cost. But in the end, how much can you offset and how much more affordable can you get? It doesn't always work out. It's just challenging all around. So some of the ways that we find a way around it is, okay, well, if we are still beholden to that, but can we maybe shift the focus from holding it in stock to having maybe direct containers to our consumers? So we're not holding it ourselves, and that container, instead of being offloaded in our facility where we're running those freezers 24 hours a day, maybe that container is going directly to Zach at his facility and it's unloaded there. We can skip some of those costs in the middle there. Can we go to purchasing alliances? We joined a purchasing alliance called Unipro a few years ago, where apart from the fact that we can set ourselves apart from other distributors on the island, it offers us the option to have access to the combined purchasing power of literally hundreds of distributors, where we can utilize that to find efficiencies in logistics on the domestic side so that we can offset some of those costs, those carrying costs, because the reinvestment in material and everything is happening on the state side. Can we then have access to commodities? You mentioned beef before, Phil. Absolutely. Instead of buying 10,000 pounds of beef, we're now buying with a combined purchasing power of 1 million pounds of beef. And can we then pass it on to our consumers? But unfortunately, in between, we're all beholden to the same costs on island. We're figuratively all in the same boat. We're a drop in the ocean, and we're beholden to the same challenges that we have.
And there's a question that's come up about the landed cost determining the price of goods, but I never see the prices decrease, only increase. Why? Do the landed costs only increase? Before anyone answers that, I want to also bring in this consolidation of smaller brands by big conglomerates, and then what you were talking about, the purchasing power of 1 million versus 100,000 or versus 50,000. And I believe that there are now a lot of these conglomerates are putting in bare minimum orders. So how does that affect Bermuda and our landed price?
It goes right back to that stickiness of our consumers, right? If they want the 4 different brands of mayo, then they'll have it. But if just to pick on Hellmann's again, because we mentioned them before, and that's not the case with them, they're a fantastic partner on the island. If their minimum order for them to even contemplate shipping an order for us is a full container, then we somehow have to come up with a full container's worth of demand that doesn't expire within the shelf life of that product, that doesn't get to a point where the carrying costs are greater than the profitability of carrying that product. And we do find this more and more often where they, on the domestic side in the US, are looking at the same challenges that we have. How can they become more efficient? And the way you become more efficient is through automation, through increasing the demand, through alliances with other partners in the same industry. And it's just difficult because we don't have that access sometimes.
And I'll add to that, as a supplier or a commodity supplier to us grows their business globally, Bermuda we're finite. We can't grow into the next town. We're surrounded by the Atlantic. So our volumes aren't increasing the way their business is. And as their business volumes grow, they say, okay, minimums have to go up, and then we can't meet the minimums. And so that we're then left to say, do we bring in this product knowing we're gonna have to throw some out, or do we have to find another source from another middleman, and that increases our cost?
Yeah, there was a question earlier about how much of the cost is reflected in waste and spoilage.
So none of it's reflected in the price.
None.
We eat it. We eat that. So if you bring me an apple that's bruised and I have to throw that apple out, how many apples, say the apple's 92 cents or something, how many apples do you think I need to sell to make up for that one apple that I just had to throw out? 92. If I'm making a cent on every apple, right? So, you know, it's a challenge. Like, we're not dealing in dollars. We're dealing in pennies in the grocery business, and I think...
And then you also have that part, whereas if you bring in something by an arrow gets shipped to you that's on the embargo list, it has to be seized and goes to the incinerator plant. We can't donate it to a food shelter. It has to go to Tynes Bay.
So we have about 5 minutes left, and I really wanted to get into some solutions. So talking about the sugar tax, and that poll that came up, I think the results were something, I mean, after we've spoken, I'm not sure if we can bring that poll results back up yet or not. But, you know, the idea of reducing, so many essential items are already at a very low percentage of duty, but there was a conversation about, there we go, the other poll. There was a conversation about the sugar tax, right? And how much sugary items, chocolate bars cost in comparison to something healthy. What is your view on the sugar tax? And
So I'm not a fan of the sugar tax at all. I don't think the tax system was unfair prior to the sugar tax. I think the adjustments that were made 2 years ago or a year ago did help. However, it is, you know, 75% is a large amount. I'm not even sure that it started to drive consumer behavior. But that aside, does it affect the price if we are granted duty relief? Yes, it will, but it's minimal, right? So when you're talking about cents, or an item that costs cents, that is 5% of the cost of that item is very slim. And as Vernon was saying, the impact is almost negligible when you look at it. You know, if you're gonna look at something that costs $1 and now it's 97 cents, are you thinking that the price changed? Probably not, right? And then on top of that, to have that granted in the middle of the worst inflation we've seen in our lifetimes, we had no control over the first cost, which is probably 60% of what's gonna make up that retail. If that goes up, then whatever that duty relief is gets chewed right up. And I think any relief is good, but I think we have to be mindful of its impact and how that might shape out.
Aaron, you had a good suggestion about the use of the sugar tax.
Yeah, I mean, you hit the nail on the head. If you want a chocolate bar, you're gonna go and you're gonna buy it. It doesn't matter if it's $1 or if it's $1.75. It's just a cost of your happiness, right? You will buy it. And And I kind of agree. I don't think the sugar tax has really influenced our purchasing habits. It's just influenced the cost of those habits. So if the government is using that tax to subsidize fruit and veg by reducing the rates from 10 to 5 or 5 to 0, that's wonderful, but it's literally cents on the dollar. My open query is, what if we just reallocated those funds? And instead of using it to subsidize specifically the category of fruit and veg, what if we utilized it to subsidize that return portion of that ocean freight? Because again, we're paying both coming here as well as going back, and half of that is just an empty container. What if we utilize those funds to subsidize that return leg? Because in that case, not only are we still applying those reduced, those subsidies to fruit and veg as a category, but we're also at the same time applying that subsidy to every single thing that we bring into the island, literally everything, because it's coming on the same 3 shipping lines, right? Or 2 shipping lines and 3 boats. It can be nuts and bolts in construction, it can be clothing, it can be animal feed, it can be wholesale beef and oil and mayo and everything in between. But everything that comes in a container will then feel that immediate reduction in cost.
See, and I'm not sure if the local community have an idea of what the cost of containers are. So there's a difference between the dry cost and the freezer cost. So a dry container, we're looking at over $4,000 per container. Refrigerated container, over $5,000. Containers from the UK, over $8,000. Refrigerated container from the UK, over $9,000. And then we will hear about using air freight. Well, we know that half a pallet air freight costs $2,700 plus from the UK.
And I think that goes to talking about like the misconception of the cost of food, but given that we have 30 seconds left, and I just wanted to talk very briefly about solutions. I think I just have to feed you guys the solutions that we talked about. So one of them was solar, right? Like the use of solar on your buildings, but the problem being that solar, there's not a buyback program from Belco, right? And that clarity around that would be helpful, because again, if your overhead costs go down.
I don't think that's applicable. We have solar at Devonshire, right? So, and we have a massive solar array in terms of solar arrays. And we only generate maybe a third of what the electricity is that's required to run the shop at the highest point of production. So you would need a massive solar array to get to the point where you're actually selling power to Belco. Again, that is something that affects our bottom line. It doesn't necessarily affect the retail price. So we're always trying to massage those expenses that are built into the markup to make a little money, right? So it's a challenge. You know, we're always sort of trying our best to find a way to save costs built into that markup. And sometimes we're successful, and other times we're not. But in the grocery industry, basically, if you're making 1% to 3% at the end of the year, you've done really well.
So given that we're now over time, sorry, ladies and gents, I'm just going to recap some of the discussion that we had around solutions. So a subsidy for the return leg of freight, which could help actually legitimately reduce. And I did give you a dream scenario. If the government had limitless funds, to spend on something like this, what would that be? And it would be a subsidy on the return freight. Education, public education around brand choices is also one. So government-run campaign to explain the use of generic items, like less branded items, and then balancing the risk and reward in the inspection process and potentially opening up the market depending on what Department of Environment and National Environment and Resources can sort of change potentially some of their systems if the government had limitless money. But we're talking about solutions, and we may as well throw everything out. But as you're saying, that the refrigeration expenses are just so high that even the level of solar wouldn't necessarily expand over. Well, thank you so much, gents. I really appreciate you being here today. Thank you, everyone, for having us.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
A big thank you again to all of our panelists and our moderator. It was a really interesting conversation. And I think we can all appreciate the interconnectedness of that journey from farm to fork. And also just looking at the connections between what we heard from Dr. Smith this morning about public perception and how that then relates to brand consciousness. So very interesting discussion and conversation. To keep the momentum going, I wish to invite our next panel to the stage, which is part 2 of the food security conversation, beginning with the panel moderator, founder and chairman of Home, Mr. Arthur Whiteman, along with panelists Greg Wilson, founder and owner of Food Forest, Mr. Warren Brown, chair of the Bermuda Farmers Association, Mr. Jamie Walsh, vice president and secretary of the Bermuda Fishermen's Association, Mr. Christopher Feria, founder and managing director of the Agri-Living Institute, and Ms. Claire Mello Robinson, executive director of the Eliza Doolittle Society. So like to welcome the Honorable Joshe Adams, JPMP, Minister of Public Works and Environment.
Well, good morning, everybody. It's great to be here. Good morning, panelists. We are one short. Maybe she's not there, but she was announced. Claire, who's the executive director of Eliza Doolittle, had to man her shop this morning rather than come here. She had a staff shortage, and I think that just talks to the very real pressures that people in the third sector are under in terms of delivering to their clients. So regrettably, she can't be here. We'll try and cover some of the insights that she was planning on offering, but we've got a very esteemed panel of guests who really are experts in their field to talk about food security. I'm going to make some introductory remarks. We'll then get straight into some Q&A. I'd say the panelists in particular came extremely well prepared in terms of making concrete recommendations and suggestions, which is obviously what is the hope of a summit like this. And then we'll wrap up. And to the extent, obviously, you all have questions, we'd be delighted to field some or all of those along the way. Household food security is a serious public health concern in rich countries with developed economies and is closely associated with inequality. There isn't any data in Bermuda to measure the prevalence of household food security. However, internationally, it is relatively high in some developed countries, ranging from 8% to 20% of the population. The contemporary framing of the solution to food insecurity in developed countries is that of diverting food waste to the hungry to meet the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, Goals 2 and 12.3. In 2011, the Food and Agricultural Organization of the United Nations estimated that 1/3 of the world's food is wasted every year, including 45% of all fruit and vegetables. In the United Kingdom, household food waste in the UK represents 70% of edible food waste, according to RAP, a British charity. Food banks, which is where Claire is right now, play a crucial role in reducing food waste by rescuing surplus food and redirecting it to people in need instead of letting it end up in landfills. We will talk more about that today. Yet, although providing food assistance to those who are hungry is a critical strategy, it is also important to focus on the remaining role of public policy in tackling the social determinants of food insecurity. Food insecurity, roughly described as the state of lacking reliable access to sufficient quantities of affordable, nutritious food, is significantly impacted by the social determinants of health. These factors, which shape the conditions in which people live, work, and age, include economic stability, education, healthcare access, neighborhood and built environment, and social and community context. So I think it's important as we frame this discussion that we look beyond simply the price of food. It's actually food insecurity is created through a number of things and primarily driven by the social determinants of health. For example, from a purely economic standpoint, The Nonprofit Alliance of Bermuda cited a poverty rate of between 17% and 33% of the population. 17 to 33. Home, hi Denise. The charity reported 1,101 people experiencing homelessness at the end of 2024. The cost of living crisis, which is what this conference is focused on, relative to housing or access to affordable healthcare, are just two examples directly impacting food security that are not related to price, social determinants of health. So perversely, trying to make food cheaper may not, in fact, be the optimum solution to food insecurity. It certainly might help on the margins. There's no disputing that. But in order for people to be food secure, Bermuda residents need a sustainable supply of nutritious food that is accessible to all. In fact, most importantly, the economic consideration may be less grounded in how cheap food is, or how cheap food can become, and much more to do with the costs that are avoided when food insecurity doesn't anymore exist. For example, in the United States, it was estimated that in 2011, so some time ago, but 2011, associated costs of food insecurity were $165 billion and related to lost productivity, public education expenses, avoidable healthcare costs, and costs to charities to keep people fed. Today, we will discuss food security in four broad areas. Firstly, the physical availability of food. For example, with almost all of Bermuda's food coming in by boat or plane, what is the opportunity to impact that dependence on imports through local production? Secondly, the economic access to food. For example, what sort of policy focus on incomes, expenditures, markets, and prices might be necessary to ensure access to food for all? Thirdly, our food utilization. For example, is sufficient energy and nutrient intake by individuals taking place today to give everybody the best possible chance of mitigating against the chronic health epidemic that Bermuda residents are experiencing? And finally, relative to all of those three things, sustainability. So can these factors, or addressing these factors, be addressed, guaranteed and addressed over the long term? So some opening remarks, but I think we'll just get straight into our questions. I'll frame the discussion relative to those four topics, as I mentioned. So let's start with food production. I'm going to ask it for all of you. What are the biggest constraints currently limiting local food production in Bermuda? So.
One of the biggest constraints is land mass. We went from, in 1980, over 3,000 acres of arable land to now, I think, maybe 600 acres. So that's a huge reduction in our ability to even produce food. So that is my opinion and one of the most important concerns.
Thank you.
It's complicated, but we have we have 750 acres of land technically available. We're farming about 350 of those. Much of the land that is remaining that is not being farmed commercially is in small holdings, which doesn't fit tractors, and we don't have a thriving, a lot of those are in small lots. So land itself is not just the issue. I think what was on the board earlier, like make government land available, I don't think that's the panacea. That's not going to happen right away. It should happen, but it's a small amount of land. I think the biggest thing to make farming go forward would be I want to start, I'm going to talk for a few minutes here, but I've done some thinking about where we are in terms of our history a little bit. And just to frame the conversation, we had obviously a very huge impact on Bermuda. In the 1950s, 50% of the population was farming. In the early 1900s, 90% was fishing or farming. And the statistic in 1950 was twice as many people were fishing or farming that were in the United States. We're now down to less than 1%. So there's about 100 souls involved, round numbers, of people that farm. We don't produce much food. We produce about, say, 20 to 25% of the fresh produce that's consumed in Bermuda. and obviously it's a small amount of the overall food production. But it is critical that we maintain a productive capacity in Bermuda. For example, right now we're sitting on 125 tons of potatoes that are about to be put into storage. We had a good year for potatoes. We have a lot of onions in storage. We have a lot of carrots in storage. We have a lot of food, and it's nutritious food. As you said, it might not be as cheap, but it's more nutritious. Consumers today are spoiled for choice. You go into a shop and you don't know, you've got different types of mangoes, not just mangoes. You've got, I mean, bananas are a different thing because there's a mealybug there that is restricting those to come in. But we have so many choices today that Zach was saying, the consumers are driving the market. They are. When we sell potatoes, for example, right now, 5 years ago, it was perhaps, or maybe 10 years ago, there weren't so many choices. Today, there are so many choices that we're going to end up putting a lot of these Bermuda fresh potatoes that are more nutritious into cold storage. Would be best, I think, served, though, by having the Department of Agriculture closed years ago when it was seconded to the Department of Regulation, Department of Environment and Natural Resources, but that's a regulatory body that has not administered, in my view, farming very well. And it's changing recently, but for many years, farming was languished. Now, it seems to be sustainability is a buzzword. We need to have a change of heart, really, about what we do to keep what we have left thriving, so we can grow in the event of a COVID or a ship that breaks down. We have the capacity to grow staples, which we do, and we could bring back more animals. Bermuda, it's struggling. I mean, somebody made a comment about Tom's chickens. Tom grows the best chicken in Bermuda. It's expensive and it's very nutritious. But and Greg grows some fantastic lettuce. I've had it, it's very good. I grow cucumbers, I grow tomatoes, I grow basil. I focus on those things. We don't have food wastage. But what we do have is a department that hasn't supported us for years. This is changing. But the most important thing, I would say, that we can do at the moment is to actually have a change of mindset where the mission statement for the department, for the management of agriculture in Bermuda would be to actually put food production or growth at the forefront of the mission statement. Because it's been so regulatory that it's been no for so many years getting things done. So the importation of plant material has been difficult. Right now, we're starting to get strawberry cultivars back in. We're trying to do it. Potatoes. The greater good of Bermuda is served by having a regulatory authority that actually promotes farming rather than prevents it. And that's what we need to do. So that's probably the biggest single thing to do, is to change our mindset. As far as consumer education is concerned, that would help to have primary schools involved in getting people.
Let's come back to that, because I think that'll be but no, excellent comment. Chris, I'm just going to go to you, and Jamie, I'll come back to you because you're sea rather than land, and slightly get different context. But does Bermuda have enough land to make substantial amounts of food?
Thank you for the question, Arthur. I'll let you all know today that absolutely Bermuda has enough land to grow a significant amount of food for us, for our community and population. Unfortunately, I'm sure many of you, like myself, grew up in Bermuda with the very convenient lie that we tell ourselves that there isn't enough land in Bermuda to grow food, so why focus on it? Maybe work on getting a really good job so I can, make enough money to afford food. But even if you're in that situation, unfortunately, the food that you're purchasing does not have the nutrition that it's supposed to have. That's been tracked by the USDA over the last 50 years. So yeah, we talked about the amount of land farmed. Raise your hand if you knew that statistic. It's 376 acres.
Yeah.
Good. Some people doing their homework. I mean, just starting with that, I think we see the rich resource.
It's a mind-blowing statistic. Just what does that land look like? What form?
Many of them can be small fields, less than 1/3 of an acre. If you go on the Bermuda land zoning map at the same time, you will find large pieces of agricultural reserve on some people's property that are just a very nice lawn, which is very easy to turn into a garden. Some areas is a church parking lot. Some fields that are unused have become reforested or occupied by invasive trees, which can be a challenge if needed to clear. But what is our impetus here? Are we really committed to growing more food locally? The land resource is there.
Do you see more people interested in it?
Yeah, I'm really fortunate in doing sustainable farming from Paget Primary, where we got to install a garden there with carrots that they harvested, so that's the most important thing, is focusing on this education and getting them while they're young, so when they become adults, all that comes back. And as well, I've seen a lot of interest in college-age students coming back to Bermuda, maybe a bit disillusioned with their university education and wanting to do something more purposefully, so I see it on both ends. And also people in home gardening space. I mean, that's arguably the biggest thing that we can make a big impact right now in terms of food production.
That's fantastic. We'll come back to education. Jamie, from a fishing perspective, maybe some contextual comments and some challenges around food production from your industry's perspective.
Yeah, sure. Well, I definitely have to agree with Warren about the loss of the Ag and Fish Department in government several years ago, and that was that made a really big difference in how our industry has been managed over the years. The number of fishermen has declined drastically. The ability of fishermen to make a decent living and support their families is very challenging. The wholesale price of fish that fishermen get from restaurants and markets locally has not kept up with inflation. If it had kept up with inflation, the price would be about 50% higher. So you might see that local fish is expensive, but it should be more expensive, really. And that's very hard to justify at a cost of living summit. I'm sorry about that. But the global chain of supply for cheap imports has changed drastically over the past 20 to 25 years. And so for us to be competing with imports especially from parts of the world where forced labor and unsustainable fishing practices are the norm, that's almost impossible to compete against when we live here. We raise our families here, we go to the same grocery stores as everybody else, so our cost of living and cost of doing business has gone up, and our sell price of fish has not. So that's made things very difficult.
We have an audience question that asks, is locally produced food more expensive than imported food? I mean, a very quick answer to that, and I think from a fish perspective, potentially depends what you classify as a sustainable fish versus an unsustainable fish farming, broadly speaking.
Well, I mean, you've got very few large companies in the States that grow lots of food and the volume, and if you take, for example, you have to look at the value of the quality of the food you're growing. So that's the first thing. For example, take potatoes. Potatoes are sprayed with different products for storage so they don't sprout. And, when you shop in the supermarket here, people want strawberries in January, want avocados in August, everything, what they want has got to be good, it's got to look perfect. But when you look at a potato that's imported, possibly, you don't know whether it's got CIPC or whether it's got a different chemical on it called stadium. It's sprayed. You don't know whether Driscoll's blueberries have been sprayed with 15 types of pesticides that we don't use here. I mean, farmers use chemicals across the world, whether you use them organically, which are certified or not. But the quality is one thing. So if we grow in Bermuda, obviously you're bringing in seed, you're bringing in all the importation, fertilizer, there's a lot of irrigation equipment, there's a lot of inputs that we have to bring in on a weekly basis sometimes. And it's expensive to farm here, but again, it's fresh food, it's not any food miles on it, and it's sustainable in that respect. It's made for me.
So thank you for that answer, because I think that's an important clarify. We're going to come on to nutrition and the quality of the produce in a minute. But again, this may be controversial, possibly not. It's not controversial to me, certainly. We just heard in the last panel about how thin the margins are for food importers or food retailers. and how challenging it is based on how little control they have over the costs to influence any major changes in prices. Local farmers, local fishers have just said it's extremely difficult to be a farmer or a fisher person because of the costs. And so when we're thinking about cost of living and cost of living summit, we need to keep coming back to what are some of the other determinants in people's lives, the healthcare, the housing, the social determinants, because it's a very complex tapestry of considerations we need to be looking at in the context of overall lifestyle security. And I think particularly when it comes to food gets sacrificed at the end. You pay your rent if you can, you pay your electricity bill if you can, you pay your healthcare expenses if you can. What comes at the end of all of that is, do I have enough left to go to the grocery store or my local farmer and get some food to eat? So I think we've got to really contextualize this and be very careful about contextualizing it, because yes, we all think, crikey, we've been at the grocery store, we might have gone to a farm stand, we've got a bit of sticker shock, but that is the price. And affordability is actually much more of an important consideration, how we can create some of the leverage around affordability. So there we go. Thank you for that. Yeah, keep going, Greg.
I just want to reiterate on the when it comes to food and producing food. If we adopt a regenerative system of farming, we no longer need imports. We don't have to bring in seed. We can save seed. We don't have to bring in pesticides, herbicides, or fungicides in this type of regenerative system. We have the natural resources right under our feet. We just have to better utilize them. Instead of creating mountains, we can turn this horticultural waste into a usable product that can produce food. It's bio-intensive. And so we have to move away from the chemical solutions that we've been for the last 50, 60 years and go back to a regenerative system where we're using biology to grow food. When we do this, we don't have the added expenses. So for instance, and I'll give you a perfect example. If you go to the marketplace or into the supermarkets and you buy a 5-ounce container of lettuce, it costs you $8.99, $9. It's 16 ounces in a pound, and that's going to cost you almost $30, $27. If you're buying 3 of them, paying $30 per pound for lettuce. When you have a system without having the is required, you can now produce that lettuce for $20 a pound. It's a 30% reduction in the cost of that particular item. And we could do that with just about everything if we change how we're growing. Reduce the imports. That makes us sustainable. Use what we have, and we have an abundance of it. And that way we're able to produce a lot more food in a smaller area. And also we have to change how we grow. We monocrop. You can drive across the island and you'll find acres of carrots and acres of potatoes and acres of corn. That, again, it's very difficult for the farmer because he's monocropping. You need to be able to, in order for it to be diversified, you have to have all that biological diversity. That means in 1 acre, instead of just growing an acre of corn, have 20 different varieties of fruits and vegetables. Then you build your resilience.
Great. Some fantastic points, obviously, scaling. I was floored when the panelists told me about 100 farmers in the whole of Bermuda. That just was staggering to me. But the point is increase the supply, bring down the price. It's simple economics. I want to get on to food nutrition because we're just burning through time very quickly. Why is it important to buy local?
Right. Well, first of all, it's going to be more nutritious for you because you know it's not sprayed with. We have a very limited number of chemicals we can use in Bermuda. I mean, with due respect to my neighbor here, he does a very good job of integrated stuff, and I think what your model works for is small-scale farmers who can use lands more effectively. I think it's fantastic. A lot of commercial farmers will rotate their soils or what have you. But coming back to the question, you need to have an understanding of what the quality is. So it's an educational issue to understand that. But the value of buying local is you're getting a more nutritious product. You're getting fewer pesticides. There are some that are sprayed on there, coppers. I use integrated pest management. A lot of farmers are using biological controls. They use, these are bacteria that are put into the BT, for example, for worms. There are things like that we're using, soaps, and working with the Department of Environmental Protection to actually stock the marketing center with benign products that farmers can use generally. So that's the kind of message we need to say is that, if you find a corn, like corn was up recently, people have had great corn this year, and at the end of the season, you'll find a few heads with a few worms in it, right? Well, that tells you we don't overspray our corn. So that's good. And when you're seeing stuff coming from away, it's perfect. You really don't know. And I've been on websites, the USDA website, looking at the number of chemicals that are used on growing, and it's astounding. And that is something that is, so from a safety point of view, and that's a health point of view, local is better, Yeah.
Let's hear it from
Most fish that gets imported is gassed and flash frozen. So it's to maintain the color. The tuna that you see, that's fresh tuna, is visibly a different color than the local real fresh tuna. So yeah, it's not good. There is a growing movement for, especially with the Marine Stewardship Council, to certify fish in the global market. So that's one of the things that FAB has been advocating for, is to restrict imports to fish that has been certified sustainably caught. That would be a huge improvement.
Thank you. Chris, very quickly.
But nothing beats local.
What can be done to make nutritious food more affordable for people here?
Okay. Obviously, increasing production is going to do that. For this audience here, I would definitely challenge you to, those who aren't growing a garden, is to start growing a garden. The produce out of your garden obviously is going to be free. It's going to be very nutritious because it hasn't had to sit around at all. And most importantly, and that's something that I always teach from, is this opportunity that we have to connect to the land and grow food. There's actually something even bigger under that we all need, is a connection to nature, protecting the environment. That actually needs to be paramount, and then food is actually a byproduct of that. The minister, Ms. Lightbourne, spoke about doing things differently, and someone else spoke about sustainability. We were talking about economic sustainability. I would say that none of those sustainabilities, economic, financial, can happen until we've dealt with environmental sustainability on our island. You're talking about the loss of farmland. Think about the actual forest that we've lost in Bermuda over the last 400 years. We have less than 5% of any woodland, and if you think about native forest, that's even less. Why is that important in a conversation about food? We can see globally what's going on about climate crises. Planting a tree, yes, will make its impact on climate crises, but if we look at our own local ecosystems, growing things more regeneratively, using biology, we need to actually repair our ecosystems at the same time. So all those things are connected.
Thank you. Economic access was another big topic I raised at the beginning. We've got 2 minutes. It says we've got 2 minutes. I'm gonna sort of be cheeky and take more, but 17 to 30%, if we believe the statistics of people in poverty in Bermuda, we know there's a food insecurity problem here, okay? So that's factual. We're gonna come on. Claire kindly sent a bunch of suggestions, which I'm gonna relay to the audience at the end of this, around how we can react to all of that. But there is a big problem with people just simply not being able to afford food, which is critically important, obviously, for life. I'm going to ask one final question to the audience, and as I said, the panelists kindly provided a bunch of suggestions, which I'm going to go and whistle through as fast as I possibly can. But in the spirit of an event hosted by the government, what can the government do to help the farming community be successful and sustainable?
Well, there are some low-hanging fruits that because I sit on the board of agriculture now, and there's also 4 of the farmers who are sitting on the board, and there seems to be a new impetus now towards progressing farming. These are things that are just, I'm going to say something very simple, feral chickens. I mean, everybody in Bermuda sees feral chickens. They are taking seed, and so there's a big thing afoot to get rid of them, and it's not easy, but there's targeted, but we need to go to war with that on the island, and of course, it's going to be a health issue as well. If the bird flu transmits into the human side, the nervous center, and it's under-resourced. So again, it's something simple. There's a lot of fat in government in certain areas still. I think Bermuda, I think Public Works and Parks, farmers tell me all the time that they see a lot of fat. We need to take some resources without spending more of taxpayers' money and put it into some farming ventures and make sure that the marketing center is well stocked and that it's manned, and we're undermanned. So there is an agronomist now in Bermuda, and that person can also liaise with new growers coming along in smaller lots. But the most important thing is to get the existing infrastructure that's designed to help farming work. It's still not working. I won't bore you with any details except that an apprenticeship program should be started. It's a long-term issue. The using of marsh folly compost. We actually had a meeting down there 2 weeks ago or 3 weeks ago where we actually looked at the quality of the compost, and we're trying to put in sifting machines so that material can be recycled island-wide for farming. Water availability. Farmers are paying far too much, which is basically a tax on food production. So that should come away.
Warren, let me just give the others a quick chance. I'm conscious of this very aggressive red thing that's flashing at us. How about you next? Just quickly.
One of the things that I'm solution based. I always try to figure out solutions, and one of the things that I feel would certainly help Bermuda in terms of expanding its food supply is we're closing 5 schools. Every single school on this island was once a farm. Let's convert one back into an agricultural center. Let's take one of these schools. They all have 2-acre fields that were once farms. Let's convert them back into productive market garden style, not monocropping, but market garden where we can have students from each school come 1 day a week. Like I came up in that program in the hotel industry where I went to work SEC 1 day a week and learned how to become a chef, and hence I'm a chef today. So we could do the same thing, and the average age of a farmer is now 68 years old. If we're not producing young kids to get into farming and introducing them into it now, 10 years from now, we won't have any farmers at all. So we need to adopt a different mindset in order for that to progress.
Jamie?
Yeah, definitely on the next generation of fishermen, it's the exact same thing. There's definitely an aging fleet. But yeah.
Chris, any final thoughts?
In terms of suggestions, as I said at the beginning, a big focus on our curriculum or education system that is based on nature, based on being in the garden. I mean, talk about the things in your life that you think are important things to learn. Food growing, taking care of the nature around you. I mean, that's paramount. So starting with those little ones, and at least that's being invested should be vested into a grant program for young people getting into farming, entrepreneurs in farming, persons that are doing things a little differently in farming, definitely if it has to do with education. I think that's a great way to accelerate this.
Warren, you 10 seconds.
I wrote a letter to the permanent secretary at the time, and we now have farmers work with the agronomist comes into meetings, and he found out the Bermuda soils, for example, were short of sulfur across the board. I mean, this is something we've been neglecting. So we can start raising the bar, bringing in new rootstocks, varieties to grow lettuce in the longer seasons to increase our lettuce production by 15%. There's a lot of things we can do qualitatively, which will make, quantitatively will make a lot of difference on the.
We've got about 50 concrete suggestions we'll share with the minister and the team here, because they're really, really good, and a lot of them can be actioned straight away. I'll give you one example on economic access. In France, a supermarket of a certain size, not a very big supermarket, but a supermarket of a certain size and above, is legally required to not throw away any food whatsoever. So it has to be diverted to food banks, has to be diverted to recycling, and so on and so forth. If you think about UK edibles, 70% being chucked out, that is crazy, particularly when you want to contextualize in Bermuda that is capable and willing and wanting to drive change in this area. I want to call out the fishermen and the farmers, because this is a hard profession. They work hard. They create amazing foodstuffs that we should really be proud of locally. It's a very difficult career with very thin and very volatile margins, but having only 100 farmers or so in Bermuda, that's crazy. We need more. It's a great career. I think it's vitally important we take a minute to acknowledge the very significant numbers of people living in this country that can't afford a nutritious meal. This level of injustice is not sustainable, nor is it right, and we all must do better to ensure that every child or adult in this country is food secure. It's a complex issue, tangentially related, I believe, to the price of food. It's much more related to other factors, social determinants of health and so on. I do want to thank the minister. I want to thank the government for putting this event on. I think it's really, really important. But may we all be emboldened to collaborate as a community to take concrete steps to stop children going to school on an empty stomach, or pensioners making do with one meal a day, or the great many vulnerable members of our community having to struggle to survive. That's what food insecurity really is all about. So thank you, panel. Thank you for having us.
Thank you again for such an incredible and informative panel discussion with a lot of key takeaways that I hope we all champion collaboratively throughout the rest of the day, but also as we navigate our next steps in or post the summit. Just a few notes for housekeeping. For any feedback that you have, which we wholeheartedly welcome, please make sure that you use our QR codes for both the food security part 1 and part 2 panel discussions, and also for our import panel discussion that we had this morning. Those are both located, if you see, in the back right of the room. And also, as was mentioned by the minister this morning, we have a commitment board. Please make sure that you put your name on that commitment board to signify your commitment to our collaborative approach to the cost of living in Bermuda. And so that's break for lunch.